Europe. All right, away from the global markets now, let's begin our conversation on today's edition of Business Morning, which is on infrastructure financing. We're looking at a pension fund as an alternative, and it's been a very interesting topic, like I told you, on the during the World Pension Summit. And we have here in the studio Dr. Ese Owie. He is associate fellow at CIPRA, the Lagos Business School. And also we've been joined in the studio by Ogbonna Okuko. He is the country representative at the International Institute for Investment Promotion. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to start with Dr. Owie. As the issue of infrastructure financing is very topical. Before the World Pension Summit began on Monday, there's been a lot of how do we fast-track infrastructure financing in Nigeria, looking at the limitation of our banks. How do we go about it? And now that the pensions fund has been brought into the picture, what would be your own take on the best way to finance infrastructure development in Nigeria?
Yeah, thank you. I think that going forward, we've seen what happened over the last 2 days at the Pension Summit. Infrastructure is key. There's an infrastructure gap. And over the world, government resources are becoming very finite. So you can't rely on just the government to provide infrastructure. So the trend all over the world is to partner with the private sector. In Nigeria, we are lucky. We've got pension assets worth about $27 billion, which is in the region of about 4.6 or 4.7 trillion. So for us, what we are looking at is to say, how best would the regulators, that is the PENCOM, engage with the pension fund administrators and set out the clear regulations for them to invest this pool of funds to finance infrastructure. But the key thing is that for PENCOM, as a regulator, it's to drive responsible investment, because you then have to balance the desire of our country to utilize the funds for infrastructure with the need to also protect the funds for the retirees to draw down on when the time comes. So for us, we think it's going to be a good opportunity. We've got the funds here, and going forward, it would be a good way of unlocking those funds. We can use it to fund infrastructure.
Ogbonna, what's your take?
Yeah, alternative funding is actually one of the things that pension funds are actually meant for, because globally everybody's willing to look at how to come out of the normal buying government bonds and all of that with the pension funds, going out of the comfort zones, I would call them, to areas where you can actually get higher profit, and then make the remarkable funds from those pension funds, so that as soon as the retirees have need for these funds, or when they get to that level, when employees get to the level where they have to now start getting back their funds, the money that would have accrued to them would be able to sustain them at their retirement age and time.
Okay, Dr. Owie, you talked about the retirees getting their monies when due. Are you concerned that there may be some challenges when it comes to them getting their monies when due, that after part of the monies has been invested?
Not at all. The point I was trying to make is that infrastructure financing or investing in infrastructure is not as straightforward as investing in government bonds or investing in shares. For the most part, most infrastructure projects take you 10, 20 years to mature. So when you are going into a project that is fraught with risks, you need to be careful not to lose the money belonging to retirees. So the point I'm trying to make is that going forward, while we're clamoring for pension funds to be deployed for national development, we must also be mindful of the fact that we need risk-based prudential regulation to guide the PFAs so that they know what to do, they know the investments to make, and they know the approach to adopt. Otherwise, you may end up investing in projects that are not bankable, that are not sustainable, and you lose the money. In South Africa, for instance, there's something called the Sustainable Pensions Program, Sustainable Pension Program for Society. What it says is that all the pension administrators in South Africa must mainstream environmental, social governance factors into their investment decisions. What that means is that when you're making your investment, you must check the impact on the environment, the impact on the society, and the impact of corporate governance on the investments. So for us, that is the way to go, given the nature of the funds. These funds belong to people who are working. So when they are 60 or 65, they want to draw down. Unless you have such prudential guidelines, the fund administrators will not be guided properly in making the investment for infrastructure.
Okay, let me come to Ogbonna. This is very interesting. Talking about framework to protect pensions assets now, if I understand, Dr. Owie. The president and even the minister for finance, the coordinating minister for the economy, talked about the fact that PENCOM needs to come up with framework that will further strengthen the protection around pension assets. If you look at the framework of PENCOM, I want to believe they have some in operation. How would you describe what it's on ground?
Yeah, what they have on ground is actually good. It's good enough for now, because, like I said, until you move out of your comfort zone, you won't know how bad or how not good those structures are, because what they still do is the investment restrictions and the portfolio limits that are given to the PFAs are still controllable, because there are certain areas where they can't go into. But looking at the infrastructure financing, these are things that the stakeholders must come together so that we can actually look at those particular infrastructure where we're talking about return on investment, where the return on investment will be huge, because they are long-term funds. Yes, you must be able to go into things that are sustainable, so that at the end of the day, you'll be able to make monies out of this particular investment. So we still have a lot of work to do. Like PENCOM, they still have a lot of work to do, because they still need to bring in stakeholders, experts in infrastructure investments, people who understand how to do financial engineering, so that they will be able to come up with a complete guideline that will actually, they can now push down to the PFAs before they can now start investing these funds in those infrastructure, that require the investments.
Now, Dr. Owie, I know you would have listened and followed the events at the World Pension Summit that was held in Abuja. If you listen to what the president was talking about and the minister for finance, what would you make of their statements in terms of our own pensions industry?
I mean, clearly, what the president said and the minister said clearly was, first, we need to grow the base. We need to grow the pension assets we have. Currently, it's $27 billion. The objective is to grow that to about $100 billion over the next 2 decades. They also made it very clear that we need to deploy these funds for infrastructure development. And if you have a look at the new Pension Reform Act of 2014 that was signed just about a week ago, Section 86, subsection I and J, clearly provides for PFAs to now invest in real estate and infrastructure. So for me, it's no longer a case of whether or not we should invest. The new law clearly empowers PENCOM to authorize PFAs to invest in infrastructure, subject to prudential guidelines. So for us going forward, I think clearly between PENCOM and the Securities and Exchange Commission is for them to drive the process of institutionalizing guidelines for responsible investment and prudential regulation that would drive the process for deploying these funds. Because in the absence of effective risk-based regulation, PFAs would not be able to adequately invest in these projects, because most of these projects are long-term, most of them are greenfield, they're brand new, so there's no history, there's no income stream to leverage, nothing. So you're starting most of them afresh. So you must have very strict regulations to balance our desire as a country to develop infrastructure with the expectation of pensioners that ultimately when they retire, they would have access to their funds. So for me, I think it's a good thing. And listening yesterday at the gala night, listening to the DG of the Pension Commission talking, she said the objective for the next decade, I mean, we're celebrating the last decade, for the next decade is to mobilize these resources to drive infrastructure development. I think that much is clear. And it's for us to sit down and agree on the guidelines and modalities for driving infrastructure development using pension funds.
Okay.